We are live. This is New Year's Day, and it's hardly a joyous day. I mean, sometimes you say to yourself, why would you even comment on something like what just happened overnight in New Orleans? What's there to say? And yeah, that's very evident. What is there to say? And yet, like a lot of you, I watched a lot of video. I looked at some of our local stories with regards to what happened, the carnage in New Orleans. I also looked at the national videos, and I obviously checked out the more graphic um, footage that is usually evident at some of these websites like, the Sky News or the Daily Mirror, Daily Mail, the British press, BBC, etc., etc. So, and I don't want to get off on a specific tangent, but I'm going to say a few things. Um, that's why, like, sort of these oxymoronic "Happy New Year," and I don't want to delve deeply into who this guy was. There's the FBI taking over the investigation. Those of you that don't know what happened and, might be late to the game, there was a driver who intentionally, by all accounts, pretty evident, drove his truck or a truck right after 3 o'clock this morning, New Year's Day, and has killed at least 10 people, several more people in the hospital. This was on Bourbon Street, which is the commercial tourist center of New Orleans. You can only imagine the amount of people that were on the streets celebrating at one time the New Year's Eve and so forth. And then this lunatic. And we don't know a lot. We've heard obviously that it's terrorism, that this was no DUI, that there was no accident, that this was very much intentional, that this could very well have been something planned. Well, obviously it was planned. It could have been something more, uh, shall we say, detailed and planned in terms of an organization behind this. And God only knows. But the images are just startling. Now, I'm not going to get again into detail on this aspect too, where you got several news organizations blurring the images. I understand that. I'm not going to get into bitching about that. It's worthless, and I understand that. I totally do. If you go to these other websites, these, as I said, the BBC, Sky News, that kind of, they're very graphic images, and they didn't blur. And I decided to watch because, look, I wanted to see and maybe discuss with you what took place. It must have been one hell of a scene as it happened. God only knows how this guy was able to maneuver around barricades, which were up, which is normally the case in New Orleans when it's around Mardi Gras and when New Year's Eve takes place, because you have, a football game taking place. You have the fact that it's Bourbon Street and all, what's taking place, the tourists and so forth. And you can only imagine, what it would have been like had you been there watching all this go down. That is, if you weren't hit by this lunatic. Could you imagine, by the way? Now, New Orleans is the site of the Super Bowl, about what, 5 weeks away. Can you imagine had this happened the night before the Super Bowl? Would they have canceled the Super Bowl? It takes a lot to cancel a Super Bowl. But this is obviously sheer horror, obviously in this crazy person's own mind. This guy was like an executioner. And I'm sure we're going to get more details as they emerge. And, he's dead. So we're not going to know everything, but I think we will probably know, given the FBI's tenacity on this case, which I'm sure will take place, will probably know the background, the who was responsible for this. Was no, I don't think, one random guy. This guy had to have had support, perhaps. Again, subject to massive amounts of investigations by the authorities in New Orleans, including the FBI and perhaps even Homeland Security and all that. But it is, and I'm not, I want to deviate from the original horror, the original attack, and all these horrific images coming out of New Orleans and the uh, commercial district there. Um, but I, and media often gets blamed or lampooned or made fun of and yada yada yada. But imagine being those photographers and cameramen and who were there not that long after this attack and had to do their jobs. I'm not saying that holier than thou, like they had to do their jobs. Point is, they do have to do their jobs, and the fact that these are rare, very gruesome images. I heard one uh, guy happened to be a paramedic off duty, and he was just celebrating with a friend, young guy, on CNN, telling Pam Brown about seeing multiple victims literally crushed, tire marks on their back and on their face, crushed, obviously deceased, as he put it. And I don't know if I can even say this, but I'll say it anyway. The only good thing in that regard, maybe they literally didn't know what hit them, and the impact of their finality was so forceful that there was no pain. That's the only thing you could say in that regard. But there are people that were disfigured and little kids and all that. That's why, again, the oxymoronic Happy New Year. I'm not laying blame to you or anybody out there. I'm just using that whole thing as a metaphor for the times that we live in and that we have to endure. That, you have this, you had that terrible thing that happened on the 4th of July a couple of years ago in Chicago, suburban Chicago, with the crazy guy shooting people. And now we have this. And I would offer the whole thing, and not in detail or anything like that, that there's no sacredness anymore in anything. And the worst thing about all of this, not just New Orleans, is we've become numb to all this. I'm not going on a he's wrong, he's right, you're wrong, they're right, they're wrong, yada yada. This is just, I mean, it's senseless, it's nutty, it's repulsive, disgusting. Throw everything you want out there. Um, but the degree to which this happens now, folks, whether it's this, whether it's shootings, mass shootings, um, I don't know. Again, it's like, okay, ho hum, until you look at it. And I'm not being holier than thou when I say this, but take a look at this. Um, Go online, and I'm not saying you have to go look for detail and see the human carnage. Just saying that it every now and then behooves all of us, myself included, to not just say, "Oh, okay, another day in America," because first of all, if it obviously this seems as if it's an out and out terrorist attack, and who knows who is behind this, if there was some kind of conspiracy, if it was an ISIS or some type of a terrorist organization that was responsible for this, and this one guy who is again dead. They're not going to be able to interview him. Not that he was going to say anything, revelation wise anyway. But we don't know anything about this. It's the initial investigation and all that. But it looks like as if that there was some organization behind this, you know. So, uh, but we've become so numb to all these incidents, and God knows when the death toll increases, which it's likely to do. There's over 30, 40 people in the hospital, some of whom are in life threatening situations, and with regards to their body and with regards to, critical condition, serious condition. There's bound to be more fatalities because of the nature of when this happened, the amount of people that were on the street, on Bourbon Street, in the commercial district, um, in New Orleans. It just paused to think not only would they have canceled the Super Bowl if this were to happen the night before the Super Bowl. After thinking about it a little bit while talking to you, I think they had to have canceled the Super Bowl. And, what it's going to do, well, you're going to rev up more security and all that, which, even with all these cops on the street and various security personnel, look what happened again in New Orleans. So that's all things to ponder. But it sometimes it takes away our overall life condition in terms of going about our business, going about dealing with friends, and just having normal human interaction and all of that. It is mind-boggling as to what really happens these days and how frenetic and how gruesome it all can evolve into and so forth. Sometimes as I said, we've become so numb and we're not even there. You can only imagine witnesses, victims themselves, families, everybody who is going about the so called normal day in their lives, even on New Year's Eve, waking up this morning and dealing with all this. It is, again, mind boggling how you could. I can only imagine what it's like in New Orleans itself. So, with all that said, if you want to comment about this, please, feedback is welcome. Again, we're going to hear a lot more about this, I would imagine, in the ensuing days when we know more about who was behind this, if anybody was. And it's likely to me that there was somebody, some organization, who knows, behind this. I don't think this is a lone wolf, as they called him, but we'll see. Could have been sympathetic. The suspect himself is of Middle Eastern background, actually has a military background. So we'll wait and see on the particulars and all that. But it makes you wonder again just how horrific indeed it was, especially people who were right there at the scene of the crime. Okay, it's New Year's Day. It's going to sound almost ridiculous to say, but I hope you all have a civilized rest of the day, and we'll see you soon enough. I'm Rich Lieberman. This is the New Year's Day Rich Lieberman Media Pulse.